Hello, this is your host Akhil Navluri, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Techospace podcast series. In this podcast episode, I'm super thrilled and honored to welcome our guest, Mrs. Julene Marr, who happens to be the director of the reputed company Deloitte, New Zealand, and she's based out of Wellington, New Zealand. So, Julene, off to you. So, why don't you introduce about yourself to our audience in depth?
Hey team, yeah, lovely to be with you. So, like I said, I'm a director at Deloitte. I get to work with our global teams, but based in the lovely New Zealand in Wellington, and specialising in our cloud and engineering practice. I've been around tech for a while, both in public and private sector, and across multiple portfolios. So, really pleased to bring to you a bunch of information and insights, and hopefully some funny anecdotes from my time and my journeys through the world of tech.
Absolutely looking forward for that, Julian. So I would say that, this conversation is going to be really, really interesting and insightful. So yeah, so at the stroke of this hour, which is 8:35 a.m. IST, let's kick off with the podcast episode. Yeah. All right. So Julian, tell me about this. Like, how did you start your journey in the IT industry? And in this process, how did you make it big as the decision maker of an organization?
Thank you. I was probably one of those people that didn't start off in tech originally. So my origin story is as a scientist. And I came through science, and at some point I decided, hey, look, I really would like to come out of the publish and perish world and try something different. And as it turns out, really, really good alignment between the way you need to think in science and the way you need to think in tech. So I was doing global climate change and the interaction between oceans and atmosphere, and how
Okay.
things move around in the global climate, which turns out is really analogous to, at a smaller scale, the way that things move around in organizations and understanding complex systems inside it. So I started my career just working in a local logistics firm, and then went all the way through and held a bunch of roles, both on the technical but also on the leadership side, coming through ultimately now to holding a directorship within Deloitte. So it's been this weird and wonderful ride through a bunch of different areas, and been super, super privileged to talk to loads of different people from all over the world on that journey.
That's pretty interesting to know, Julian. Since Julian, I mean, you told me that you started your background in science. So did you find any similarities with the, aspects of science and tech?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a similarity in terms of that drive to really understand the way that things work and to really want to improve things. And I think those underlying core values really set people up well to alternate between the two worlds, between science and tech. It's just a slightly different lens on the same thing, but increasingly as I go, I love it because my worlds keep coming together. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, how can we solve this problem? Maybe like a science modeling or one of those key challenges. And it's like, well, actually, you're doing things a hard way. So let's apply some of the technical knowledge to that problem. But the ability to be able to look at a system or an area and to be able to critique and understand and then apply that critique in a meaningful way, I think is just fundamental skill sets that go through both. And I think that's just, the great thing when people from those two worlds can come together.
That's brilliant. I mean, I really love the collaboration. I mean, a correlation, how you're able to bring the two worlds together. And that is pretty insightful on that, Julian. Now, I would just like to understand, like being the, the director of Deloitte New Zealand, what are your roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, sure. I was having to think around this, and I think our key role and responsibility as a director is to make things go really well for our clients. And I think that's one of the things I love about working with Deloitte is actually our key ask and our key mandate is to make sure that we're doing really well for those people that we work with. And it may be understanding the tools and the tool sets that we're working on, but also really supporting them when they reach roadblocks and issues that they're just not quite sure how to navigate. So I think in terms of my key role and responsibility is very much about supporting the people that we work with to make sure that they get the best from Deloitte, not just Deloitte in the local sense, but also Deloitte globally. So that's a key
Globally, right?
role. Other than that, a lot of business development, so understanding what's important, understanding what is working in market at the moment, and then being able to take that and deliver that in a meaningful way out into clients who are looking for cutting edge understanding about the way things work and looking at how can they apply that to their special microcosm that they work in within that environment. So I think that's my key responsibility that I have there, and in particular doing that in the public sector. So lots of government work comes my way.
Awesome, awesome. Now, I just wanted to understand this. Like when you're talking about the key tool set, is it about the technologies that you're talking about in the back end, or is it like the framework that you're, trying to develop?
It's a really, really good question. And I think often we think about technologies as a widget or as something that gets put in. I think when I think about it and what we're bringing to clients, it's really about, yes, about bringing the technology, but it's about bringing the art of the possible. And so increasingly, I work more and more. I used to work a lot in interoperability and using cloud and the ability to expand and be really agile and adapt really fast. These days, it's also about how you can take your technology to the next level, but use it not to solve technology problems, but to solve business problems. And I think that's a
Exactly.
really, really important part of it. Um, the bit that I would say, though, and the part of my role that I find really, really rewarding is that it's not just about putting a technology in or doing things to a client, because that doesn't make it land enterprise level and it doesn't make it sustainable in the long term. So it's just as much about that as what you were asking about the frameworks, not only the frameworks for the technology, so how to best do it, apply it, think about it, structure it, but also the frameworks for people and process. So you start thinking about something at enterprise level, which has much broader applicability, and you can start to reuse it or apply it in new and novel ways without having to start from ground up and making it far more sustainable in the long run. So that's where I tend to orientate towards, especially is the people, process, and art of the possible, bringing
Okay.
all of our good technology stuff together.
That's a pretty good insight, and I really love the way you're saying that it's not about the technology, it's about how you understand the business. So
Hmm.
that is pretty much that is almost that's always needed in an organization, and that's how the things go really well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's core fundamentals. It's 101. If I had to describe my job, understanding businesses is probably pretty much all what I have to do. That's the key
Brilliant.
expectation.
Brilliant, Julian. Now, Julian, like, what are your views on the norms of business transformation? Then, coming to the leadership and requirement gathering when it comes to an MNC.
I think what's really key is on a couple of levels. So one is really the ability to work in a really agile way, especially when you hit multinationals. They've often got local pockets of expertise forming within a much larger enterprise. So one of the key things that we do, especially with working with the financial sector or insurance is another really common one here, is the ability to have frameworks and understanding that operate at global level. So you keep that consistency of your brand so that the messaging is there, but then enabling it to be understood and to be able to have teams to work locally in a relatively agile way, like consuming those assets almost in a marketplace way. What you don't want is all the local teams re-engineering everything that's happened at a global level, but you do want to give them enough flexibility to understand how to apply that in a meaningful way at a local level so it's fit for purpose for the market they're working in. And I think that's having really empowered teams, enabling them to be multidisciplinary, but also facilitating the work for them to happen in a really agile way is a real powerful way of operating, so that then you're bringing both the best of global and the best of local to get the right thing for the market they're operating in.
All right. So when you talk about local teams, is it the teams that's, based in a particular department, or is it the team that is, based in the region of New Zealand? Like, what do you exactly mean by local here?
Yeah, sure. And it's a really, really good question. I think local is what it's made within an organization. So if you have a large enterprise, local may be your business unit. Um, If you are talking about a global multinational, then local will be a regional based one that is often working on your global platform, but they're needing to apply it in a local way to fit the purpose of the market. So I think it's a really good question and a great insight into the way that large enterprises, especially multinationals, operate. You need to understand the context and make sure that you're targeting it right for the team. Often where teams get into a lot of troubles, and this is where we help them out locally, is you have almost this strangler pattern where there's one team that holds on to everything too tight and then nothing can happen, and they essentially become a bottleneck for the enterprise. So that's where often working with those groups to understand how do you keep the organization safe and operating in a safe way, but while also enabling other teams to fulfill self-service as much as humanly possible is it's the heart, it's the secret of making things work in a way that actually functions really well and effectively.
That clearly explains the point, and it actually answers my question now. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
good. It's a tricky balance to get perfect.
it is always, every day is not the same day. You always have to, try different ways to, solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get the change in the leadership, which is always the next bit that comes, and what was right and what was perfect for the last leadership or the last C-suite or the last strategic direction may not work in the future. So what makes it exciting and interesting is that we're continuously needing to pivot to what's actually right for now rather than what was right 10 years ago.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. That actually sums up the point. Now, Julian, how would you like to give a walkthrough, on the designation of a product and a technology portfolio lead that you yourself were in your previous organization?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's a really beautiful intersect between being product led, which is understanding what's really, really important for the customer and making sure that you're shaping something that really, really works and delivers to what they need. So you can attach value to that outcome, but then also having the privilege of working in a technology sense that you understand enough about what the art of the possible is, how you can create and construct something to really then make it align back to the value that is adding value out to the product for the customer. And when you're working really in deep technology, that can mean that your customer is internal within the organization. It's other teams consuming what it is that you're putting together, and that can mean that you have teams from every single part of the enterprise wanting what it is that you need to deliver. And you always need to run it like you're managing an orchestra with lots of different moving parts coming in together, trying to operate and all work in the same space. So the way I would really describe the intersect and where that comes in is you really need to understand what's going to work, be operating strategically beyond the right now, knowing what the right thing is to come in, but really making sure that you are, regardless of whether it's an internal customer, an external customer that is consuming whatever it is that you're producing, it's making sure that you're really aligning and staying ahead of that market for you. So you know what makes a difference, but also you can clearly communicate back to the team and you've got the leadership to say, this is what we need to do, this is what's really important, and let's make sure that we are really going to meet the market when they need it, rather than in a year, 2 years, and we've missed that opportunity that we need to get up to. That's been huge. That's been a really, really big part of that.
Awesome, awesome, Julian. Now, Julian, you just told me, I mean, an orchestration. So, I mean, for our listeners would be a little bit curious to know this, like, what is that orchestration that is comprised of, like in an MNC?
Yeah, sure. It's so a lot of the time it's bringing together. If I take the example of where I work now, the example would be we have teams from multiple different business units, globally and locally, all wanting to consume assets or infrastructure, or all needing to work together on a single client project or outcome that they really need to deliver. When we're acting in a portfolio or a product delivery leadership role, especially within the client and on behalf of them, what's really important is that we're able to bring the best of all of those areas to the client and get them to work together in a way that looks harmonious. Now, regardless of whether you're doing that internally or externally within an actual organization itself, the ability to understand when things are required, what is going to be required at different points. Your audience will be aware of the service delivery lifecycle, so the SDLC, of which different bits and pieces get stopped at different phases. So what do you need to do to unblock things? How can you get them to move, but get them to move in a strategic direction? And how can you make sure that the right players are playing in the right spaces at the right time? And often that is the bit which I call conducting the orchestra, to make sure it's all working in a way that actually functions really, really effectively. Otherwise, it's not a very pleasant noise, it's not a very pleasant outcome, and there's often tears
Exactly.
before bedtime. Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely, absolutely. That actually happens, and yeah, it's pretty much relatable to me as well because I also, worked in a company for 4 years, and I really understand, like, how the, project scene goes on. Yeah, it's a little bit chaotic, I would say.
Yeah, there's beauty. There's beauty in chaos. You just have to get through the chaos to appreciate it. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, like, I mean, this is a thing which I'm really curious to know. Like, Julian, according to you, how do you think that, the project management approach varies across different sectors, and how have you navigated across these differences, while delivering these high performance, or let's say, these large scale government programs?
Mm, 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 mm. And I would like to tell you that there's one answer for all the things. And I think what I've come to understand and appreciate in a deep way is that there's probably not one solution for managing projects or outcomes that is the right answer for every question that you ask. And so I think the big thing around project or product management, or whatever way it is that you're choosing to implement or roll things out, is understanding, one, it's probably leadership that's really going to make or break it. So if you have poor leadership, it does not matter which method you use. It is still probably going to be a bit of a cluster, and you're probably going to be in for some repairs. So it's just a no-brainer, fundamental. If you have your leaderships, your stakeholders, you've got your funding, you've got your approval, and it's really just about how you go about doing things. It's then about understanding what is the wider ecosystem that you're operating in. So if you're in a super structured organization that is super hierarchical, that doesn't really want you to be constantly changing and evolving, and every week you come up with something apparently new, you may be better to be a little bit more structured in your method, a little bit like maybe not a full waterfall method, but something similar that gives them the certainty and the structure that works in harmony with maybe a large program going on around you, or maybe the work that you're doing. If you're doing a large replacement of a large SAP system, for example, or you're doing a large replacement of a core infrastructure, that's not going to be really organic. Like, you're not just going to make that up. You really cannot do that organic switch over of many of those things. You've got fundamentals that need to be in place and need to operate in a really structured way.
All right.
But if you're doing like quick iterative updates to a product and it's just little configuration, you're pushing it out, being really, really agile and being able to move really, really quickly is definitely the right fit. And it means that you can move really fast, test, learn, and deliver out to clients, and keep adapting to feedback really rapidly. So I think the most important thing that I've learned about the project management in different sectors, whether it's like maybe defense, or whether it's like government sector, whether it's out into the private sector, like the financial sector or banking, or maybe insurance, is that each of them have the right fit for the right job, and it's probably not going to be exactly the same in every single area.
Yeah. I mean, Julian, in my experience, I've actually went to a lot of events, and in the events, whenever I meet people, decision makers from, financial companies, what they say is that they have a lot of compliance regulations attached, when they are trying to, deliver a project. But I mean, does the compliance regulation even come in hand with the project management approach as well?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And if you don't understand the compliance environment, banking is another really common one, and even government, right? Like all of them have pretty strict compliance and social license to operate. If you lose your social license, if you don't operate within the compliance boundaries, it'll either be a regulator, or for government, it'll be the public more broadly, that all of a sudden mean that you can't operate and you can't work the way you want to. So when you're considering that from a project viewpoint, if you have, in our case, it would be APRA for the banking sector, or you have whatever the compliance framework is that you're working within, what is super important is that you factor that into your timeline. If you make commitments to your stakeholders or commitments to your customers, and you haven't been through your compliance framework, then quite frankly, you're probably putting both your reputation at risk, but also your company at risk if you just push it out anyway. So yeah,
Exactly.
it's a really, really good shout out. The only thing I would say about compliance and what I've learned over time putting this in is you can get pretty slick if you make it systematic. So, you've got your compliance and it's probably the same pattern every time. So the first time it will be hard, but if you go back and treat every time like it's brand new, like you've never seen it before, you will never get faster. So work out what that looks, work out how to make it super systematic, and then how to turn that into a quick pipeline so you can work through your compliance, do your checks and balances. Like you were saying before, apply the framework in a smart way so that you can get to that end game much faster. And that's probably the way I've used it in the past, not as a roadblock necessarily, but as a way to really work out how to systematically do it faster.
Exactly. That actually, answers my question. Now, Julian, how would you like to, I mean, would you like to give an insight on the, the key reforms that you have taken to enable high performance teams and organizational excellence?
Yeah, sure. It's been one of probably the areas that I have enjoyed and worked in the most, is creating high performance teams and understanding what makes them tick and what works really well within large enterprises. So the key thing that we have done on a personal level is make sure that we enable things like psychological safety. So that team knows that you've got their back, so that you're making sure that you've got the coverage on a leadership level, but also they're building trust in between each other so that everyone knows, from a resilience point of view, what the levels of resilience are so we can recover. They know what the values of their teammates are, because often what you value isn't what the same thing as the person next to you values. So let's work out what that is and work out how to work together. They understand where they come from and how they, do they like a lot of data? Do they like to be really creative? Like they know their way of working. And they know that if they can operate in that environment, there's a sense of safety. And I think that's just the hierarchical model of needs. I think that sense of psychological safety is really, really important as a 101 for any high performing teams. I mentioned before the leadership and strong leadership and understanding that they're doing something that matters is really, really important for a high performing team, because then they will naturally start rowing in the same direction, which means that you get that alignment, and that alignment then allows them to move faster, learn from their mistakes, and keep iterating. I think
Exactly.
the other thing for high performing teams that I think is really important is that you've got a common framework or a common language that everyone is talking. And I mean that in a technical sense,
Mhm.
because I think you would have seen before as well, everyone comes from a different discipline, from a different area, then they all bring knowledge, but they don't always talk about it in the same way or explain it in the same way, or everyone thinks they know what's best and what they think they know is what best is not what the next person thinks they know is best. So creating a common framework of what good looks like and what best looks like is great, because then you can allow levels of autonomy at scale and everyone can go off and actually use and apply and get it there. I've got one more thought if you're good with what I think works well for large teams. To get a team to be high performing and working at speed, I'm such a great believer in automating things. So don't get them to keep doing things that don't make sense and don't add value. So automate the basics, right? Automate your testing, automate your framework, automate your scaffolding for whatever you're creating, especially in technical world. It doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense when we're talking about infrastructure and you're doing things once, but even that on the scale that Deloitte works, right, because we do infrastructure again and again and again, it makes sense for us to automate that and automate the rollout. Increasingly, as AI is coming in, I think this is going to be increasingly important. So we're operating in very, very similar ways, because otherwise you can move so fast from idea to implementation. It is just going to be all over the place. So let's make sure that we're building in all our good guardrails, our scaffolding, and making sure that people do things that make sense and know what quality looks like when they see it. And I think that's going to be the secret to high-performing teams in the future.
That's brilliant. I mean, since you just brought up the point of AI, I'm not going to ask the AI point right now. I'm going to ask it in the last, I mean, before we actually conclude it. Yeah. So, I mean, you just told me that, one person thinks that he wants to use this particular technology and the other person, rejects that. He said no. But if there is a chaos like that, let's say in the interest of the people to use the technology, what does that, how do you resolve that? Like, how do you make people on the same page?
Yeah, I think I think it's good that everyone has strong opinions, but they need to be loosely held, right? So I think it's okay that people put their opinions on the table. There are two ways that we make a decision. Either we have a lead in the team who owns the strategic direction and therefore, like this is the way that we're going and this is how it fits in because they have a much bigger picture. Or we come to the consensus as a group if we're operating in a community way. So if you're setting up a community of practice, for example, you come to as a consensus as a community, you document this as the way that we're going to work, and then that's how you need to operate. I think what absolutely kills team productivity is answering the same question again and again and again and again. So the key thing is that once you make that decision, once you document your pathway, once you hopefully put it into your automated tools, that you don't keep coming back to it, right? So this is the tool that we use to do this job, unless there is a significant change to market. Just get on and actually now deliver the value. So I think that's the way that I would normally do it in the past. I don't know if you've come across the term hippos, the highest paid person in the room often makes the decisions or gets the final count. When I start talking about leadership, I didn't necessarily mean like that. I think it's about having clear mandates and roles and responsibilities in the team. But if you need to go up the food chain, if it is an option that has significant cost implementations, getting the buy-in, doing the stakeholder hygiene to then allow it to run is the other really important thing.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, I mean, I really like that short form hippos, highest paid paid person. Wow, that's a good abbreviation. This is the first time I'm hearing that. All right. Yeah. Now, Julene, like what is your USP of, driving innovation and, organizational excellence when it comes to the areas of cloud and engineering?
I think one of the key things with especially the innovation and the excellence in cloud and engineering, it's about thinking not only what are we doing now, but how is it going to be done in the future? So I think you and your audience have probably seen we can gold and platinum plate something, absolutely, right? But actually, does that make sense for what the organization needs? Is it going to need it in the future? And does it hamstring us from being able to do more innovation in the future and maybe adopting or taking on new technologies or new ways of working if we try to do absolutely everything upfront? So I think key for innovation is being able to create safe spaces where people can work, innovate, bring ideas, creating time and space for people to be able to do that and use imagination and creativity that we don't get the opportunity to do if every day you're simply doing tasks and what is the next thing, or you're just really just focusing on whatever your next Jira task is or whatever it is that's coming in. So creating that space, but then what's a killer for creativity, what's a killer for innovation is not being able to access those tools and those tooling, which is new to market, that they can bring in and think about and use and operate. So I think it's about also having that safe space conversation with the security team that often operates across every enterprise and be out saying, I'd really like to use this, or let's give us the freedom within this suite of tools so that we can bring in these things, bring in these ideas, access new thinking, and use it to really work out how to best apply what we know, but maybe in a new or novel or different direction. I think increasingly, I know you're going to come to AI at the end, but this is 100% the questions that are coming every day, day in, day out, and it's so disruptive in engineering, but increasingly it'll be disruptive across cloud as a whole. So I think that thinking in those safe space conversations are going to need to come, because if you will still have companies that won't use it and companies that will use it. It's just that those that won't use it will become increasingly unproductive and then cease to exist. Right. So I don't know that there's many opportunities not to innovate now. So it's about doing it in a safe space.
Exactly, exactly. Now, I mean, you just told a point where you say that, people, instead of, having that monotonous approach of, just doing the day-to-day tasks, people should have an imaginative kind of an approach when they're doing something new. So, Julian, do you feel that in an organization like there needs to be a 1 hour of time where people have to, imagine things and, say that, okay, this has to be in a creative way. Do you feel that, that kind of an approach is necessary?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think if you don't, people become so, like, just human nature becomes very task driven. And it means you're not bringing the best of you to what you're doing. And you'll just, um, you lose the connection to what you're doing to then really want to innovate and do better and do more and do well. And so I think creating that time and space for creativity is just, you will get back exponentially more. And there's a very good chance that people will then keep being creative on their own time, maybe not on the company time, right? And so I think it's a
Yeah.
very small, it's a very small thing to offer to then allow far more to come back in terms of what you want to do and what you want to achieve.
Exactly, exactly. Now, Julian, would you like to, share your expertise across the, the product management, the agile methods, and then finally the public sector transformation?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the agile methods, it's a really, so agile is an approach, right? And it can be implemented in different ways. There is a basic framework that sits underneath, but there are different ways that can be applied and adapted. And I'm sure all of us have come through, your Scrum methodology or your SAFe methodology, or you name it, right? There's quite a few players in that space at the moment. And if you keep bringing it back to those key fundamentals, which is allowing teams to operate at pace in a way that works typically for a cross-functional team, we are not trying to solve all of the problems up front, that you actually kind of don't imagine that you know what the organization is going to look like in 3 years' time, because there's a very good chance it's going to have changed. So really thinking about how do you break down things into the increment that makes the most sense? How do you apply good thinking to it in a way that enables teams to operate independently at speed, and ideally can take things all the way through to production so that they can really see and test and feel what's going on there. That's not practical in every organization. Let's be serious.
Yeah.
So a little bit of real talk. That's not really how it works in every organization. So what you need to
Yeah.
know is how to take the good fundamentals, but allow it to work within the framework and the organization that you're working in. Often just randomly releasing things into a banking production environment is not a thing, right? Like that's not going to be how it works. You know, maybe there are some amazing banks out there, but like you said, regulatory frameworks are really important. And the same for government, right? You all of a sudden stop being able to pay people because you had an innovative, good idea that you pushed out. That's fundamental impacts on such a foundational level to so many people's lives. That's not a thing. Like, you're not going to be able to do that. So I think the big thing that I would say about using and applying agile frameworks is you need to think about how it operates at an enterprise level so that every team is not doing something organically and they're all doing each other's, like everyone's duplicating all of the effort across the board. So how do you make sure that that harmony, that orchestra is actually working together? It becomes really, really important. But also make sure that you are taking the lessons and the thinking, but applying it in a way that makes sense in your environment, and remembering not everything is an agile project, but you can probably take some of the lessons learned and then see how you apply it to what you're working on. We've seen a bit of a pushback here around everything needing to be 100% agile and agile all the things, because it's become more increasingly widely recognized that the same hammer for every nail may not be the right hammer. So how do you make sure that you are actually applying the right thinking? And I think that's probably just a little bit of a word to the wise of what we've seen around the traps, and it's certainly true. One last thought on agile, which always frustrates me when we go in, is it's often seen as an excuse not to do things. So when you become agile, it doesn't mean you no longer get to do good hygiene. And it doesn't matter whether you're a product manager, so making sure that your KPIs are there. So you are making sure that you're delivering value. It doesn't mean that you don't get to do documentation, although in the future I hope that pretty much what the documentation is automatic, but you know, it means that you still have to do those things. You still have to do your code reviews. You still have to automate your testing. You do need to do the hygiene that goes along with it. And I think all too often what we see is agile is used as an excuse not to do the foundations, not to do the basics, which I would say, yeah, it works for the first 3 months, but then give it 6, 12, 24 months, and then all of a sudden you're in a pickle and you've got a big mess to clean up. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a harsh reality, and that's how it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's fine if you're only in an organization for 3 months, but yeah, don't be the one left after 24 months trying to clean that mess up. That becomes a real issue.
That's a good piece of advice, Julian. Probably, I will adapt this, or let's say, our audience also will find it very much relatable to all the points that, you're just telling about.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
All right. Now, Julian, like, what is your take on, fostering, let's say, a collaborative and an inclusive environment in the IT sector? And would you like to talk about the number of certifications that you have been awarded in your entire journey?
Yeah, sure. Um, I've got to say I'm not. So I think certifications are important, but they're probably not the foundation of all the things. I really think it's not just about collecting badges. It's really about delivering results. And so I am probably not going to flag every single certificate or degree or everything that I've ever collected, because I really would love or prefer that my track record is more measured on results and change and making a difference. And I really do feel like that is a really big thing that sometimes we get lost in when we're building towards our gold jacket or our purple jacket or whatever jacket it is that anyone is offering, maybe a red hat, or God only knows what people are wearing. And I'm like, well, that's fantastic. But do you have any real world knowledge on how to apply that and do that in a real meaningful way? And I think I've seen a lot of people come through that are very good at book learning, which is fantastic. but not very good at actually understanding what's important to clients, not overcomplicating solutions, and making sure it's actually the right thing to be doing at the right time. So
Absolutely.
I think love the idea of certifications, and that it gives you a really good foundational understanding. But I'd say don't get obsessed with the books. You need to get out into the real world and do the things as well. But I think it's a really important one when it comes to inclusive environments, like you're saying. And I think it's about it. To me, the inclusiveness is not just about your basics like your gender or your ethnicity or anything along those lines. I really appreciate my teams, and what I really enjoy is the diversity of thought. So I like the fact that not everyone's the same. I like the fact that we bring in ideas and frameworks on what good looks like. So, when you were asking me before what happens when everyone has an opinion and it's not always the same, that's like every day, right? But we get together and we understand, and we understand how to combine different people coming from different perspectives to really get us to a better place. And I think it means that learning cycle and our learning journey is so much faster than what it would be otherwise. And pretending that we know all the things is just, it's not true, right? And so that's where bringing a variety of experience is just so important. So I think that's what I've really supported with coaching my own cross-functional teams, cross-functional working with other vendors, cross-functional working with across government, functional across sectors, right? It's always about bringing that diversity of thought. But I think the important thing when you're talking about leadership and what's my role and how do I operate in there, it's always about helping to manage that and manage people so that they can have trust in the inclusive environment. And I think that's probably a key part of my role, is allowing people to be heard, bringing together and synthesizing ideas, but staying focused on what's really important so that we actually land on an outcome and not just 4 weeks of good chats with no outcomes. Like that's no one ever thanks us for that. So that's kind of I think how it brings together the inclusivity with what I think good looks like.
That's a right approach, Julene. Now, Julene, I mean, since you just told that, there are some anecdotes that you would like to share. So, in an anecdotal point of view, like, you worked on complete, different government projects. So, did you get any success story, like when you were, delivering a very good government project, like a good, let's say a good response from any, from any client with respect to the, the project that you have delivered?
Yeah, I think a lot, and you'll know from McLeod and engineering and from deep technical, a lot of the time when things go in and go well. So I've done a lot of integration work in the past, which is just connecting up and sharing data across an enterprise. What is really great and what is often not said, or it can be actually, but the stakeholders don't recognize it, is when there's no noise, when everything just works, when the data is flowing and the information is going. And I call it the invisible hand, the invisible network that operates across the whole enterprise, right? And I think the best thing that anyone's ever said is it on? Is it going?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And then all of a sudden it is, and it's on and it's working, and they can't see what's happening because often there's no UI for it. But what they'll see is all of a sudden the people on the front line. So I'll get feedback from frontline teams. Oh my God, my job is so much easier. I can all of a sudden just do things. Like it just appears where it is. The leadership team just have this massive reduction in noise because I'm no longer getting complaints, issues, challenges from across the board. And the technology teams, what's been great, some of the feedback from the technology teams, especially when we don't do technology to teams, we do it with teams. The feedback has been, it's been such a great experience working with you guys because you set us up for success, you built capability, and you really meant that when we finish doing the project, we felt a real sense of ownership, and then they can keep building on their skill sets more and more and more. And it actually meant we were like collaborators in the end, rather than, you know, someone coming in to do a job and then leaves. And I think my favorite thing from all of the projects and the work I've done is the relationships that stay on after it's finished. And
Yeah.
almost across the board, from everything I've worked on, I'm still chatting. We still catch up for lunch or dinner or whatever, because we built such a good relationship and we understood what was important, and we got it across the line in a way that often they're working in thankless areas, or for strategy, you know, like often it's they're fundamentally had to make some hard calls and some hard changes with their teams, especially when it comes to changing the way that things work. But actually, they really appreciated the change, the thought, the collaboration. And so we've just stayed in contact the whole time. And it's been wonderful. So they've become friendships after the years,
Exactly.
rather than just, yeah, a client and consultant relationship.
Amazing, amazing, Julian. That's pretty good to know. Now, Julian, now coming to the hardest part, which is like the AI part. So I wanted to understand, Julian, like how can AI be so disruptive? Like all the above aspects which we were talking about. Like, Julian, remember during when we had our first conversation, you told me that AI is compared to the industrial revolution, but my take is it's akin more to the technology revolution. So how do you weigh this up?
Yeah, I think it has the potential to be incredibly disruptive, and that many of the things, so I work a lot on the business side and then working at how to apply these technologies and solutions out. But I also am really privileged to also work on the technology side, so I get to see the disruption coming from there as well. I'll give you an example of one of the kinds of teams that we're working with at the moment to show you how kind of disruptive and how much change is going to start coming, and then where I think is actually going to go. Because of the limitations on the technology or what they've done through time, this team was doing a whole bunch of manual processes continuously to try and make decisions, to try and understand what needed to come next, to try and work out how to size and evaluate what the right thing was to apply in the particular query that was coming in from their clients themselves. It sounds like a relatively simple thing to do, but I do end up doing a lot of work in the medical field, and like you'll know, everybody is different, right? So everybody is an individual. And it had been an incredibly hard journey to work out, what does good look like? What does good look like for us? And how do we apply it to all these unique individuals coming along on their journey? And you could think of that as mainly in a technology problem, as in, well, why don't you just do that technology wise? But the change with things like the access to, so let's think about agentic AI, or using an agent sitting on the surface. They can ask a question now, someone relatively untrained. So before, you may have had to have a specialist that had been there for goodness only knows how long. They can ask a query now. It can go back and pull back what is the information on the person, what is the relative global standard for it, what is it that needs to apply in this circumstance, where is it from an organizational standpoint in our rules and what we need to apply. How does that then actually feed out into, for example, like a cost-based framework that we need to think about and apply to this one? And how does that then look in terms of what really needs to be done? There may be overlays for the particular client in terms of their socioeconomic status or wider things going on in their environment that would previously have taken a person, multiple people, so many handoffs to so many experts to bring that information together. And now one person can bring together that information, come up with the synthesis, come up with a recommendation. So not necessarily the final outcome, but recommendations. Decide what's really important to then consult with the high degrees of speciality on, and very quickly communicate that back to the client or the end user. you can imagine as those sources of information becoming more increasingly trusted over time, that actually that starts to shift more and more, and the speed of being able to do that response and get that back to the person
Right.
becomes increasingly fast, because what you're talking about is making changes and differences in people's lives, often, especially when we're talking about health and medicine.
Yep.
So that's the front end. Engineering, though, before we would have been manually coding things, would have been creating our little Java rules or our Node.js's or whatever it was that we were doing. We were doing some things. We were creating some integrations. We were doing manual coding all over the place, potentially, if it was bespoke, or maybe configuration of a system. Maybe there wasn't a product API sitting on the boundary of a system, so you would have been in there doing a thing. That's starting to be increasingly sped up, and it's starting to go away, right? So I think that's where agents can help us make sure that we're coding in a way that's appropriate. It can very quickly take, so long as we've got frameworks. So what you were saying before about frameworks, hold on to that. Frameworks and guardrails, really important. But it can then do all the basics of that, pull together what's required, pull in the engineering needed for it, start doing the automated test cases. So all the unit testing that every engineer I've ever worked with hates writing, like do your unit testing all off the back end of it, right? Make sure it's there, make sure it flows out through the pipelines. The agents can start to work with one another to start to pull together this work end to end. And I think that's really what's changing, is the ability on the front end to cut out processes that don't make sense. And I think eventually we'll probably get rid of large systems as well. So they'll be headless. You won't interact with the system as such. You'll just interact with a way to essentially a glorified UI that allows you to do everything you need to do.
Right.
And at the back end, all of the manual work that everybody hates or loves to hate, that's not going to be a thing anymore. We just have to think about how to do that in a careful and safe way. So we're not inadvertently introducing rubbish code. We're not introducing security breaches or risks, that we're not introducing spaghetti junction is how I think of it. So it works perfectly in its little narrow confine, but actually as an enterprise level, you just have redone the same thing 100 times because 100 different business users asked for it, but you managed to do it really fast. So that's where I think the nature and the flavor of the roles and what's important is going to change, but it's not necessarily taking people out, but it's really shifting on its axis what we previously thought was important. So that's probably my take on where it's going and why I think it's going to be so disruptive in all of these areas.
Exactly. That actually, completely covers the entire aspect of it. Now, Julian, before we actually conclude our podcast session, let's take a pretty lighter route. At the moment, we were just talking about the technology aspects. We were talking about your journey, then, your view and norms about certain things, then, all about the AI disruption. Now we're taking a lighter route in the form of a rapid fire round, a very quick fire, rapid fire round, like talking about your likes and interests.
Oh, yeah. Let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. So the first question to you, Julian, what is your favorite sport? Is it rugby or is it cricket?
Oh, rugby every day. Yeah,
Rugby.
100%.
All right.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite rugby player?
Ah, I want to say Richie McCaw, but there's been so many over time, but that guy is a total legend. Yeah.
I've heard of him, and yeah, I've heard a lot about him. I've seen few videos, and he's like a legend, and everyone in New Zealand really talks about him. So
Oh my God. And then he finished doing rugby. He now flies helicopters, is running mountain to
oh,
coast. Like he's continued to be legendary even after he left the rugby field. Some people end up with concussion and dementia from head knocks. That guy's a machine. So yeah, no, I take my hat off to him.
truly a machine, completely. Yeah. And now, Julian, if I would just like to ask you, like, what is your favorite Indian food that you would like to try every time?
Oh, I like to say guava paneer. I really, really enjoy that. I'm a fan of a good biryani. So I think I sit on the fence. I've got friends who are from North India and South India,
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
it's always an ongoing competition who has the best food. So
absolutely.
I don't want to pick favorites. They're all good. But yeah, no, I think that's yeah, I'm lucky enough to have loads of friends who make so many good dishes. I'm not gonna pick one. Actually, there's a really nice, and I know it's not Indian originally, but there's a really nice butter chicken. I have one of my friends, Shanky, it does do a beautiful butter chicken. So special shout out there.
All right. I mean, since you're talking about the North India and South India, I mean, our cultures, I come from South India, so our culture to that of North India is so different. It's like almost like two different countries.
Yeah.
So that's why
It's big
the
enough to be two different countries, right? Like it's absolutely massive. So yeah, totally.
the competition just keeps on going, and there's a huge debate, and that always keeps on going.
So we could spark a war over this. So like yeah,
I know,
let's
I
not get
know.
too political.
It is going to go to a different zone altogether.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Julian, if I ever visit Wellington, what is that place that you would like to suggest me, for a visit?
If you're up for a bushwalk, I quite like tramping and hiking. Walking along the skyline and getting out into the bush, there's loads of really lovely places where you can just get immersed. The land here is absolutely beautiful, lots of native birds, and you can get lost and not see any people, right? And just be at one and at peace with nature. Wellington is famous for its wind. So on a windy day, maybe find some indoor spaces to be in and don't bring an umbrella that's going to turn inside and out. But on a beautiful day in Wellington, when the sun is shining, go down to the beach somewhere, park up, go to a cafe, grab some delicious food. And I think nothing beats Wellington on a beautiful day, sunny, overlooking the waterfront. So that's my pro tip. Sunny day, go to the waterfront. Rainy day, maybe find a little indoors activity.
Oh, that's a good thing. I would just love to try that. Probably it's in my wish list now, and I just take that.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah, it's a bit rainy today, so today is definitely an indoors day that you want to be doing.
Right. I mean, I can just totally relate because I come from Melbourne. I mean, originally from Melbourne, with my master's course. So I totally can relate to that windy weather. And
Yeah.
Melbourne also has a massive windy weather.
Exactly. The weather is actually really similar between Wellington and Melbourne. So yeah, you'll have that exactly right.
I can totally relate to that. So, yeah. So, Julian, the final question to you, like, what was the last book that you read?
The last book. Um, I actually listen to a lot of podcasts.
Okay.
So I'm gonna opt for the last podcast, which is the
All right.
book, oh not book, I listen to audiobooks. So the last audiobook I listened to, or the one I'm listening to at the moment, I've listened to it a load, is the economic history of the world. And it
Mhm.
goes all the way from pre-medieval times through to current day. And it takes you through how culture, society, expectations, the introduction of currency, it really does step you through how the global economy has changed over time and how it's really responded to things like pandemics or changes to the industrialization or big shifts in world power and
All right.
how that then has influenced and shifted how the economics gone. So I tell you, it is a little bit heavy, but you did ask me what the last thing is, and that's exactly what I'm listening to at the moment. It's generally either science or history. So right now, it's not necessarily the history of the world. Like otherwise, it's often Russia, China, India, or
Okay.
the Roman Empire. But for now, it's yeah, all about the
All
economic
right.
history of the world.
So when you were reading about the history of India, what was the history that you were, looking more into?
I was really interested in the times, so leading up to when the British came along and started, so you
Yeah,
had
yeah.
the leading up to that, but then
Hmm.
the exodus of Britain from India, and in particular how the boundary lines were just randomly drawn on a piece of paper, between Pakistan and India and that whole subcontinent. And then
Yeah.
as a result, when the British eventually did pull out, it was done with such a lack of grace, like for good reasons, but such a lack of grace. The fighting, the chaos and the wars, and the amount of, and this is a bit deep, I know, but the amount of death that happened as different ethnicities and different
I
groups
know.
had to
Yeah.
move around between states, and people who were neighbors who had lived harmoniously for years, even though there were different religions or came from different origin stories, all of a sudden they couldn't work together, and that the
Yeah.
displacement of people at such a large scale. I think that's a bit that makes me so sad, and I don't think it's well known or well understood.
I know. I mean, these subjects which you were talking about, they're actually there in my school. So I mean, in India, like we were always like, I come from the central board. So we were taught about, the Indian history, the Indian independence. So all my life, it's just all about, knowing about the Indian history.
It's fascinating, right? And then you go to the other end of it and you go to the Rajas and where it was beautiful, before, when everything was just lots of kingdoms, and all the kingdoms used to exist, and the level of opulence and wealth and the amazing innovation and drive and essentially industry as it was known then. It's such an incredible, rich history of a
Rich
whole
history, yeah.
continent and a whole people. It's absolutely fascinating. So could talk for hours on that, but like you said, maybe that's a different podcast.
It is a different podcast, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. All right, Julian. So finally, thank you so much for, taking time from your busy schedule and being part of the Techo Space podcast initiative. It was such a great, great conversation that we were having. And it was like, it was so flowing. I mean, especially I was really, really immersed in the conversation where you were talking about your journey. Then, from the science background, you came all the way to tech, then how you're able to lead the teams, how you're able to foster a collaborative and an inclusive environment, and your take on certifications, which was completely, insightful throughout. So I just had a great time, conversing with you through this medium.
That's awesome. And thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who stuck through it to the end with us. Much appreciated. And please feel free to reach out or connect. Available on LinkedIn, and really happy to connect and continue the conversation.
That's brilliant, Julian. So, listeners, on this note, this is your host Akhil Navluri signing off. We would be back with another podcast episode with another eminent industry leader very soon. So, till then, keep listening, stay tuned. Goodbye, thank you, and au revoir. Thank you.